Association. I think the biggest thing coming up right now is next week I'll be meeting with representatives from the Pennsylvania Game Commission, working on a new updated bear fencing guidelines and recommendations on how to deal with bears in Pennsylvania. We've been seeing a lot of stuff online. We've been getting a lot of emails regarding bear attacks on our bee yards. And unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation out there and a lot of very bad advice on how to deal with bears. So I'll be meeting with the executive director of the Game Commission, Bob and I, Bob Tatro, our secretary treasurer. We'll be meeting with the executive director of the Game Commission, as well as the director of Bureau of Wildlife Protection. So they were excited. I reached out to them back in March. We were supposed to meet, and then the whole COVID thing hit, and we finally got the meeting rescheduled. They're excited to sit down and discuss this. I would hope that probably within the next 3 weeks or so, we should have a new document out that has not only the new fencing guidelines that's endorsed by PSBA and the Game Commission, but also step-by-step recommendations from the Game Commission on how you deal with a bear attack. So that's the kind of the biggest thing. And of course, we're always working in the background, dealing with ordinances and legislative issues and things like that. And I won't bore you with all that right now, but just know that we're out there. We're still working for all the beekeepers in the Commonwealth. It's just it's a constant challenge with all the things that are on our plate, and it never seems to go quickly. We've got some bee law issues coming up we got to work with, and a few other things. So stay tuned. Those of you that are members, thank you. We appreciate it. Those that are not members, we encourage you to join. What you get out of it for $20 for an individual membership is a fantastic newsletter that Bob Tatro puts together. It's usually about 40 or 50 pages every month, which is pretty good for a newsletter. And then on top of that, we're representing you at the state level, things like the bear fencing guidelines, the legislative issues, ordinance issues, so on and so forth. So you may not get a immediate direct token, you don't get a nice little decal or a coffee mug or anything like that for joining, but we represent all beekeepers in the Commonwealth, and the more beekeepers that we have as members, the better it looks for when we go to Harrisburg and fight for you guys and girls as beekeepers. So that's kind of where we're at with that, Ken. So if anybody has any questions about the state association, I can answer them. Otherwise, we can move on to the next topic.
Let's go. Move on.
Perfect. All right. So I think the next thing, Ken and I talked a few days ago about some of the topics we wanted to cover today, and it's kind of a hodgepodge, but it's things that are kind of fresh in our mind and what we're seeing. And you guys all saw Charlie's email, I guess it was last week or so, about the high mite loads that were being seen up that way. Well, upon discussion with a couple of folks from Penn State, other beekeepers across the Commonwealth, beekeepers down my way, including my own hives, it seems that we're seeing high mite loads everywhere. And by high, we're talking anywhere from the low 20s to the upper 80s, which is catastrophic when it comes to beekeeping. So I know I hear from a lot of beekeepers that say, oh, I treat in August, and then I do I'll do formic acid in August, and then I'll do a cleanup sometime after Thanksgiving with oxalic acid. And I think the biggest concern we're seeing here now is that that's a huge time gap between treatments. Those that did treat with formic acid in August are actually still seeing high mite loads right now. So waiting until after Thanksgiving, you're still 6 weeks away. There's a lot of damage that can be done. And I think the take-home message really is just try to get away from your calendar beekeeping. Go based on what the bees are telling you, based on your Varoa mite loads. One of the things, Ken, we should have checked, put in that survey, and I apologize I didn't get it to you. Be curious to know how many people do mite checks before treatment and then again after treatment to see the effectiveness of that treatment. A lot of beekeepers don't do mite checks in general. Some will do a mite check and then do a treatment and then leave it at that. We're getting away from management of our colonies, and we're just kind of throwing stuff at them in hopes that they survive and doing the right thing. a beekeeper that's not too far from me who I mentor. He's a good, he's a very good beekeeper. He pays attention, and he has, we always joke that he's on a calendar type of a beekeeping. He does, something in May, he'll do something in August, and then he'll do a cleanup in December. And he actually helped me do mite checks on about 35 colonies the other day. When he saw the mite numbers, and he knows the treatment regime that I use, he immediately went home and checked his, and his were through the roof as well. So I got him to change his thought processes and routine. Tying into that, one of the things that we also got wind of, so to speak, we had an apiary advisory board meeting last week. And one of the things that came out of that meeting was a discussion of formic Pro versus Mite Away Quick Strips. So those of you that use formic, you know that Mite Away Quick Strips was the original new version of formic acid, and that's been out for a number of years. And then within the last couple of years, Nod Apiary Products, which is the producer of formic acid, Mite Away Quick Strips, also came out with a product called Formic Pro. And a lot of people have been switching to the Formic Pro with the understanding that Mite Away Quick Strips was going to be phased out. Now, there was speculation that Formic Pro was a lighter formulation. It wasn't as strong because Mite Away Quick Strips was to be used for I think it was a 7-day treat. Charlie, do you remember? I can't remember what Mite Away Quick Strips is. I think it was one strip for 7 days and then another strip for 7 days, or 2 strips for 14 days, I think. I haven't used it for a while. The new Formic Pro was for 10 days or 2 strips for 21 days. Do you remember, Charlie?
I don't remember the exact formulation, but I know that overall seems to be the discussion that Formic Pro is not as effective as the Mite Away 2.
Yeah, well, it'd be not Mite Away 2, it'd be Mite Away Quick Strips. Mite Away 2 was the version before that.
Oh.
You're aging yourself now, Charlie.
I am.
So that's where I was going, is that so now the discussion is, and the Nod Products is saying that no, it's the same formulation, it's just released differently, which accounts for the longer treatment time. But this is just speculation, but we're wondering if the Formic Pro is not powerful enough to get under the cappings of the brood, thereby not killing the mites under the cappings. And now we're seeing these increases. So you've heard discussions and I've seen articles about mite bombs and robbing behavior, bringing back mites, this, that, and the other thing. That might occur in some spots, but now I'm really starting to like, for instance, my hives, I have at the Pittsburgh International Airport, a number of my hives. There's not a beekeeper within 2.5 miles of me because I have basically 9,000 acres at my disposal. There's not a beekeeper around me. My mite levels are still going through the roof. And I've been doing mite checks, and what we are seeing were low mite levels or moderate light mite levels in July. We would treat with formic acid, the Formic Pro. August and September, the mite levels were very low, 0, 1s, and 2s per 300 sample. And now here in September and October, the mite levels have just drastically shot up. And what that tells me, and one of these mite biology issues, we know that up to 70% of our mite population can be under the brood cappings at any given point. So if we're using Formic Pro and it's not penetrating the cappings, we might be knocking off phoretic mites well enough, but we're not piercing the cappings in order to kill it. So continuing on with that discussion that we had, we did find out too that Mite Away Quick Strips will not be removed from the shelves. It is going to continue to be used and put into production. So beekeepers now have a choice between Mite Away Quick Strips and Formic Pro. Both are formic acid. Mite Away Quick Strips, if you've been using it long enough, you're aware of the anecdotal evidence of queens being killed with the use of Mite Away Quick Strips, not so much with Formic Pro. So what many of us are speculating is that the mite away quick strips is a harsher product, but it does kill the mites. The downside is you might kill your queen. So, excuse me, you have to take that into consideration. So I wanted to mention that for two reasons. One is the mite away quick strips is still going to be in production as pro. Tied in with the fact that depending on the product you use, don't go by calendar date beekeeping. I encourage you to get out and check mite loads. Do it frequently. Do it before a treatment so you know what your treatment or what your mite level is, and do it after treatment so that you understand if the treatment works or not. Too many people throw treatments in and then just assume that it worked, and oftentimes it doesn't. Another issue that we're seeing with formic acid is that in high humidity, it's not effective. So if we get a very humid summer and we're using formic acid because the temperatures are 75 degrees and it's within that temperature threshold, if it's humid, it's not going to work, or at least not work as well. So there's a lot of considerations to go in there. I see here in the chat, there was a comment about the high mite counts, if they're related to weather period with the mast year, mild winter followed by hot and dry summer. I'm not sure we could speculate on that at this point. These are all things that are ever changing, as you know, with nature. So we'll have to, make note of it and, see what happens in there. The mast crop, there's tons of acorns, but there was no fruit or very little fruit. So it's hard to say how that ties into everything. But what we do know is what's happening in the hive, and we do know that some of these miticides are not being productive for that. There was Ken, can you put that survey result back up for me real quick?
I was going to say that with the Formic Pro, one of the big share results.
There we go.
The big thing with Formic Pro is it has a lot longer shelf life. The expiration dates is a little bit longer.
It does. It has a 2-year shelf life versus the 1-year shelf life. And there's nothing wrong with using it. I use it because it does have a longer shelf life, but you do need to be cognizant of your mite levels and what may. Yeah. So I was looking at the poll results there, and it looks like a lot of people used Formic probably August and September. And now as it's gotten colder, I see a bunch of people have probably been using the oxalic dribble. So that's fine. I think the takeaway here is with those mites, just stay on top of them. I think we're going to end up with a lot of dead colonies this year because I think those high mite loads, even though we expect them every year, for some reason this year, I think it's going to be higher than normal, and we can't point our fingers to what's causing it. But I do think that a lot of beekeepers that treated in August and September and thought that was going to be enough, I think we're going to find some dead bees this winter. So, get out there. It's still, the weather's still cooperative enough, or at least we should get some, get out there and do a vaporization or dribble, or it's a little chilly for Formic, but you could use Amatraz, which is APA-VAR. That's a little bit a longer treatment time, and you can't have supers on, but it works. So any questions regarding the mites and the mite issues that we're seeing?
You recommend the vapor now over the dribble with the temperature being cooler?
Yeah, I would do the vapor because a couple of reasons. One, they recommend that you only do dribble once over the course of a winter. Multiple dribbles on a colony can be very harsh, whereas you can get away with multiple vaporizations with minimal impact to the colony. And vaporization works better when the bees are loosely clustered. Like today, it's 52 degrees down here. Yeah. It's they're not flying. They're in the hive. They're loosely clustered. You can get in those temperatures anything above 40 to 50, 55 degrees, and the bees aren't flying is a great time to vaporize. If you get below 40, the cluster tightens up and the vapor can't penetrate that cluster. So once we get into December, January, that's the time to do the dribble because the cluster is tight. You could do a real direct dribble to the cluster. And, if you know anything about biology of the winter cluster, it actually the bees constantly move in and out of the cluster, changing positions. So they distribute that oxalic throughout the cluster that way. So let's see here.
How soon after treatment should you check again?
Oh, good question. Yeah. So depending on what you're using, typically 24 to 72 hours is your mite drop time. So when you do a treatment, at the minimum, wait 24. Ideally, you're going to wait 72 hours. In fact, Charlie Vorsek, you could probably comment on this because you did it. I think you did a check at 24 hours and then came back at 72, and there was a massive mite drop.
Yeah, actually, we didn't check at 24 hours, and I went back at 72 hours to clean the boards because we had slides under the screen boards, so I cleaned them, and oh boy, it got me all mixed up now. Anyway, at 72 hours, there was a tremendous drop, but
Right.
now I'm not sure if it was because we had done a dribble, and I followed it with a vapor. And so at 72 hours, we got a lot of mite dropped.
Right. So it's safe to say, give it 72 hours. And, in this case too, with the weather, we may not be able to actually do a mite check in terms of an alcohol wash, but certainly a sticky board in the bottom of your hive will give you a good indicator as to, what your effectiveness of your treatment was. I had a beekeeper call the other day because they pulled out a sticky board and it was loaded with mites after a treatment, and they were concerned. There's so many mites, they wanted to do another treatment, and I had to convince them to look at it from the other direction. Is that your treatment was actually good? You killed a lot of mites, so there's nothing to really worry about at this point. I'd be more concerned if they did a treatment and there were no mites on that board, either because there were no mites, which is highly unlikely, or it's that the treatment didn't work. So those are the types of things that you have to be cognizant of with that. I think, was there another question about mites? Oh,
Steve?
Hop Guard, and how effective is it? Yeah, I've used Hop Guard once when it first came out. I didn't like it then. I think we're now on Hop Guard version 3.0, and from all the reports I'm hearing, it's still not any good. It's sticky, it's messy, it's a low efficacy, meaning that it's not very effective. They advertise, I think, 80 to 90%, and it's actually probably closer to 50 or 60%. So it's organic, but it's not a very effective treatment when it comes to mites. So there's better ones out there like oxalic and formic acid that are, they're going to be a little bit harsher than Hop Guard, but definitely not messier, and they're definitely more effective. All right.